those who are preparing themselves for appearing in NET examination, especially for the preparation of language, literature and grammar. Do they know that our literature is totally influenced by every item of English literature that is written in the form of novel, drama, poems, short stories, essays. That is totally influenced by the history. How history supports in understanding the modern literature. It is really a remarkable and outstanding thing for the university scholars and learners. Dear students, you study that first Prime Minister of India who wrote that our present lies in the past. So likely that he addressed that English works like a window of the world. English fills us with the international connectivity and relativity on the basis of culture, language, everything is shared on the basis of this language. So this knowledge of English literature will help them in understanding the past. Through the glimpse of history, we understand the literature. What kind of literature was written by Mahatma Gandhi through the truth of testament? In his whole life, from 1914 to 47, it was known as Gandhism in India because he struggled hard for the freedom of nation. Likely that there are different type of classifications of literature we study in English. First classification that we study in English starts from Elizabethan age. When Queen Elizabeth came at the throne, the whole literature was written in praise of that queen because everyone was free to write anything as per the freedom. So later on, it was classified in classicism, neoclassicism, romanticism, pre-romanticism, present age and modern age. So these are the chief classifications in English literature we study. Every kind of classification in literature is totally influenced by the historical events and incidents. Whatsoever happened in the past, our present we see through the mirror of literature that is totally influenced by history. So dear friends, you are learning here literary trends in the 20th and 21st centuries. All of you, those who are preparing for the examination in appearing the Ignou examinations, especially you are going through the basics of modernism and postmodernism. In the history you have studied that there was First World War in 1914 to 18. It was the time of First World War. 4 years continue, the whole world was under conflict and contradictions. So at that time and before that time, here in India, Rabindranath Tagore, who got the first Nobel Prize, so he was the first Nobel Prize winner of our India because he wrote Where the Mind is Without Fear. At that time, India was being ruled by the English people. In spite of that, he imagined that our common man, layman, general man should be free from the exploitations and injustice of the higher classes and ruling classes. So at that time, that was the literature written by the different literarists, dramatists, novelists, historians, those who came at that time in their form of fashion. So they described them. Dear friends, in 14 to 18, we read this thing that the total literature was influenced by the First World War. Later on, when there was the rise of Italy and Germany, because these were the two countries which were drastically influenced by the First World War, and they had to become the victim of First World War. Their financial, their social, economical drawbacks and weaknesses came at the glimpse in the form of Nazism and fascism. In Italy and Germany, there were two persons, Mussolini and Hitler, who started to become tyranny and dictator. So it was started in the form of 1938 Second World War. It was the time of Second World War, 1938 to 1945. 1945 was the ending of the Second World War. So in between First World War and Second World War, there was the literature that was mainly influenced by the economic crisis in the USA. In 1929, it was the time of economic crisis in the USA. So the whole literarist and dramatist was totally influenced by this new event. What happened later on in 1945? After 1945, the USSR became the superpower, world power, up to 1990, 1945 to 1990. But after 1990, there was crucial and revolutionary, visionary changes all over the world. There was the unification of Germany in 1990, and this was the greatest time for America to emerge again, because this was the decline and declination USSR. When the USSR was fragmented and segmented in different nations, then America came in the form of superpower and veto power. After 1990, up to this time, America is the superpower and veto power. So the whole literature is influenced by these worldly powers. But India is the only nation which is developing nation, and our present Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, who has the power to address the worldly nations even. The USSR, the USA, both are conflicting each other for their selfishnesses, and they are interfering in nature. That can be addressed by our present Prime Minister. So this is the great spiritualistic and social values of our nation. The whole present literature is influenced by them. Dear friends, you have studied chief important events whatsoever happened at that time in English literature. You can easily characterize them. There are different aspects of the novel. You can write in the form of law, character and narrative mode. There are three classifications. First of all, what do the novelists think in writing? That is planning. Second is characterization. Third is narrative mode. So these are the techniques, manners, styles that are used by a novelist. Now we are reading Future of the Novel. Simply it is the title. We are reading in the form of title. The novel in the 20th century. Dear friends, whenever we discuss about the 20th century novels, dramas, poems, then we discuss about the USSR and the USA, especially because these are the world powers, and all the nations are being influenced by these world powers. These world powers has created the upheaval in the minds of the readers, listeners, writers, speakers of English literature. What happened at that time? They started writing different type of poems, novels, dramas, and we read this thing very clearly that they use the technique, that is stream of consciousness technique. What does the stream of consciousness technique address to us? That if the time is same, place is different. Place is same, time is different. So these are the main chief features that we study in stream of consciousness technique. On this basis, all novelists readdressed the public. Ezra Pound, Mrs. Dalloway, and other modern writers, those who use this technique. It happens with a common man. When a man physically sits anywhere, then some ideas takes him out from his and he is not mentally present there. It happens usually. So this is the technique that was invented by the Ezra Pound and Mrs. Dalloway. So this technique was used by the modern writers in 20th century. Students and scholars, today we are going to be advanced in understanding the novel in the post-modern world as well. Post-modern world. Which is the post-modern world? After 1990 or before it, after 1945, this was written in novels in the form of stories. The story of the novels was created, taken from the incidents of the history. The novel in the present age. What kind of novels are written in present age? That are really praiseworthy and admirable in history of English literature. Dear friends, you will read these words very commonly in the modern literature, the future of the novel. Do we visualize the case of the novel, the same kind of decisive break with its past at the dawn of the 21st century as seen in the beginning of the 20th century? We observe that a deep current moves today against the novel. It is sought to be replaced by popular fiction on the one side and journalistic writing on the other. Both exploit the sense of suspense and curiosity around ordinary questions of interest. Still further, the sociological aspect of the novel, it was called a documentary form since it adhered to the common details of existence and sought to capture the rap and weft of life in their immediate surroundings. The sociological novel in our context has been made redundant by long descriptions of cultural and social life in historical writings. Dear students and learners, you are reading Thinkers and Philosophers. As per the thought of the thinkers and philosophers of the modern age, should express only that which one perceives in the given environment, since that makes more sense than an artistic visualization of a phenomenon. A number of arguments can be marshaled in support of this view that we can consider in brief here. For instance, the form of the novel is seen as a passive form of expression by the writers of the New Age, V.S. Naipaul, in the form of modern writers, especially novelists. We will read the history of the writings of V.S. Naipaul, the famous novelist of the post-World War II era. Post-World War II era means after Second World War. V.S. Naipaul wrote novel, had said that the new millennium calls for a kind of writing and deals with things head-on without softening their edges. Facts are what Naipaul had come to pin his hopes on in the change age scenario marked by experiment, innovations and descriptive sufferings. As we observe the phenomena, we also notice that the common reader Virginia Woolf's term, a novelist herself, is more interested today in pop fiction that helps one to kill time and take care of boredom. Dear friends, we will read a number of novels was written by Mrs. Dalloway and Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf, who is known as the propounder and starter of the stream of consciousness technique in writing his different novels. And their characters that that she uses in the novel, in writing the novels, that becomes the victim of a great tragedy in their life. So this was the great tragic end of the characters that we study in Virginia Woolf and Ezra Pound novels. Deconstruction, the reasoning doctrine of the contemporary period, has blurred distinctions between fiction and non-fiction, as well as between the shared and not shared. Compare with this novel proper, with its 18th or 19th century counterpart that brought about changes in people's responses and attitudes. So, dear friends, time and again, if you read about these novelists, you will know this thing that there are remarkable changes in the writings of the novel. Earlier in ancient time, there was the different type of novels that was written in the form of Elizabethan, classical, romantic, neoclassical, pre-romantics. They are different as per their different understandings. Earlier we have discussed Rabindranath Tagore, who was the first Nobel Prize winner in 1911. Tagore and Premchand in Hindi could hardly be accused of writing crisis. Novel in which the human stood marginalized and indifferent in a capitalist world, victims of a fate over which they had no control. Lu Hashun used fiction and notification equally well to promote the interest of social change in China in the first half of the 20th century. So these are some of the remarkable examples of the critics that we are studying now. In the end of this topic, we will read, this way of thinking is a break from the traditional literary form. As always, the novel form has to resort to experimentation and in a big way so as to meet the requirements of the audience to whose vital interest it has remained committed since its origin. Means this was the time of advancement in science, likely that we are using a number of social sites, websites, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and these things has become innovative and inventive things for the learners, and we are learning a lot of things while sitting in one place. Throughout the world we are connecting with the personalities. If we want to know anything, unknown things, then easily we can know through these social media sites, websites. As per the speed and accuracy of these systemology, digitology, electronology, technology, we are becoming advanced. This is the advancement due to the English literature, because they thought about the future of English literature and they kept in their mind that the whole world will become, inventions are being expected in future still now. At an abstract level, it can be said that a form may gradually weaken and disappear if the spirit that keeps it alive remains no more active to sustain it. In this sense, a rejection of one form of genre or genre includes a building up of different set of and conditions for a new form in writing. This in a way provides freedom to those who wish to explore unknown territories in writing. In English literature, especially we study there are 4 skills, but ultimately provide just the practical and most experimentalist technique to the readers, and whatsoever we write, that becomes concrete in our mind, in the memory. So it should be noted down, every word in our mind as well, understanding. At the end, let us quickly go over a few related things. Firstly, facts, straightforward views, and responses in themselves may not be adequate enough to present the true face of life and conditions surrounding us. If we, took, if we look back in time, fiction performed the role of taking into account not merely incident and events, but also situations that project life in its complexity. Thus, the idea of realism, central of fiction, could also be interrogated, keeping in view the demands of the 21st century world. Secondly, conditions and situations in their stark form could take us away from what we call an objective view. The traditional novel form may take us so close to the happening of life. Thirdly, fiction in the 20th century has been multicultural and multilingual, particularly in the post-colonial world. Students, you know that the total literature of the all languages, time to time, influenced by the nature, because nature has created variations, adversities, diversities on the basis of its color, size, shape, figure, qualities. So likely that our whole literature has diversities. There are so many diversions, varieties we study in literature, and our literature is totally influenced by the culture of the different countries. Every nation has different type of culture. They have their different type of food, clothing, shelter. These are the differences. These are the distinctions. So on that basis is written. On that basis is literature is written. Diversifications. But after all, we have a great unity on that basis. Unity in diversity. It is the great feature of our nation. Why? Because God has made the nation in the form of varieties. Likely that nature has created variations. But there is one supreme thing, we have unity among them. It happens only in India. It happens only in India and in nature. So our country is the naturalistic, patriotistic and nationalistic in superb kind of. So this literature is being written in modern time in this 20th century. Within 20th century writing, a major concern has been nationalism. The idea of nationhood emerged strongly in the middle of the century. Such nationalistic struggles have brought in their wake social identities of a different kind, rather restricted and narrow as compared with the broad human identity. In the formation of such identities, religious faiths, cults, rituals, whole cultural notions of peculiarly celebratory activities have been emphasized to demarcate one community from others. Getting? Student, all of you are getting. Whereas there is a demand to modernize minds and attitudes, there is the counter demand to preserve ethnicities and specific ways of life. On some extent, here we are reminding the writings of William Wordsworth, who wrote in his writings in praise of nature. Nature was really praiseworthy, admirable and appreciable for him. So he was called as the worshipper of nature, priest of nature, lover of nature. Likely that in this present time, we can appreciate this present time in the form of varieties of nature. Dear friends, time and again we are studying this thing in literature in this democratic nation, by the people, of the people, for the people. It was a term which was invented by the America, the USA, before 2000 years. America invented it, and this term was recollected by Indian Constitution in India, so that we are following still now. With the advent of new theories in the last few decades of the 20th century, there has been a strong tide of instability in the realm of fiction. This instability has come mainly with theories of post-structuralism and deconstruction. Deconstruction and post-structuralism. These are the two terms that we are using in learning in reading English literature. Because after 1990, it happened with the USSR. USSR totally fragmented and segmented in different nations as per their freedom and independence. So this was the demand of liberty for the development of their nations. This seems to have shaken the strong political ideologies such as those of national assertion and anti-imperialist bias newly found by the former colonies. The writers confronting this phenomena seem baffled by a number of conflicting ideas submerged in their text. Earlier you will perhaps you have read this thing that Ukraine was the nation in the USSR, and now the USSR demanded to re-establish and reconnected that country with the global landscape of that nation. What happened? There was confrontation, there was conflict between them, there was no mutual compromising with them, so it was started in the form of the World War. So present time, in this present time you can take this example, fresh example of the USSR. So the whole literature is being influenced by these incidents in this present time that you can capture and that you can write very easily in explaining the 20th century literature. Dear friends, these readings are very important. Locating the awakening, background and context. Whenever we remember and when we capture the word the awakening, we remember Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda, who addressed the whole worldly people by saying that, what was in Hindi that addressed by Swami Vivekananda, Utho, Jago and Lakshya ko prapt karo. These were the words. These were the words that was used by Swami Vivekananda for a re-awakening, for recreating the nation. How re-awakening came in India, how recreation came in India, how we can re-operate, how we can recreate, reoperate, regenerate our nation, our youngsters. It is really a thing which was invented by Swami Vivekananda. So he was not less than an inventor, he was not less than an innovator. Actually he was a social reformist because his inventions brought revolutionary and visionary change in the minds of the youngsters. So similarly, through the context of the Swami Vivekananda, we understand a lot of Indian writings in English literature. So whenever we read this word, the awakening, we recollect the teachings of Swami Vivekananda in the scenario of the Indian writings in English. We can personalities, those who came for locating the awakening. Eastman 1828 to 1906, Swinburne 1837 to 1909. Influences of American writers such as Walt Whitman 1819 to 1990. Walt Whitman, who wrote Leaves of Grass, it was a great anthology of poems. He wrote in 1855. Walt Whitman, who is known as the democratic poet and American poet, he collected different songs. In Leaves of Grass, we read Song of Myself. Whenever he freely moves on the road, he starts praising the nature. He starts praising his country. He starts praising the America, the USA. How is my nation? So through writings, readings, speakings, listenings, and singing of the America, he addressed that he is the true patriotic and nationalistic person of his nation. So it was strongly expressed by Walt Whitman from 1819 to 92. In the Fairy Queen, he addressed a number of poems in praise of nature. So especially you can recollect it whenever you will find this word in your examination, in your question paper, the name of the re-awakening or awakening. So Walt Whitman was the personality of the America, who was the famous poet of the USA, and he addressed worldly people with his spiritualistic thoughts. He sees the spiritual strain in the nature. He spent a lot of time with nature in singing in praise of nature. So dear friends, the intellectual setting of the awakening. Intellectual settings of the awakening. This was the Charles Darwin, who wrote 1809 to 1882. Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1933. Aldous Huxley, 1894 to 1963, and at the end of the century by Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. This was the time of 1939, and it was also the ending of the Second World War in 1930. Starting of the Second World War. How this time was totally influenced by the psychological novels. A number of psychological novels came in form of existence at that time, because the stream of consciousness technique also tells us that when the time is same, place is different. When the place is same, time is different. Same things he defined through his psychological novels, philosophical novels. He started writing it. He defines here that mind has three positions. One, that is conscious position, then second is subconscious, third is unconscious. So these things were exposed by Sigmund Freud through his writings. So Freudian theory is common here. Commonly it was discussed. Joyce Dyer in 1947. He was also the 20th century literarist. Some critics you can count here. Critics have compared Kat Chopin to other American realist and naturalist writers who were her contemporaries, such as Frank Norris, Stephen Crane, Theodore Dazier, Henry James, Edna Pontellier, to their heroines, or rather sexless compared to Edna, and their descriptions of sexual matters in general are tame. Not only did Chopin draw a heroine who was not afraid to be a sexual being, she is honest and bold enough to articulate that extramarital sex need not to be accompanied by guilt, and that a woman was perfectly justified in seeking false selfhood and fulfillment outside the institutions of marriage and motherhood. So these are the common topics that are generally discussed in 20th century. This is a social novel. So all the social words are being used in defining in the form of marriage and motherhood and the truth and of studies of Francis Bacon. When you will read essays of the Francis Bacon, who wrote in all his essays about the inventions of the different words. What do you think about the truth? What do we think about the marriage? What do we think about the enviousness, anger, avariciousness? These are the things that are circled and covered our soul. How we can get rid from this negativities. It is explained by Francis Bacon. And if someone has become the victim of these kind of diseases that are remedial diseases that can be cured automatically by reading the different subjects of English literature. So, dear friends, in the chapter of this, the awakening, you are learning as well the re-awakening. The 19th century, a socio-cultural background. This is the sum up of this topic. We can write here. Although The Awakening is an American novel, some information about the general background of 19th century socio-cultural context, readership and a more specific literary context may help you to situate and understand it better. Hence, some facts related to Victorian England and fiction written in the 19th century by British writers such as George Eliot from 1819 to 1880, Charles Dickens 1812 to 1870, Charlotte Bronte 1816 to 1855, Jane Austen 1775 to 1817, William Makepeace Thackeray 1811 to 63, whom you may have read about and may be useful to you, are given in this section. Easily you can understand it. It is understandable, informative, instructive and directive about the 19th century Britain. How was the social, cultural, economical, political condition of the Europe at this time? You will understand through this 19th century Britain. This was a time of great transition. Earlier we have studied this thing. That was the transitional time from the agricultural to the industrial time. It was the industrial time because the whole Europe was trying to occupy the whole nations with the industry. By the industrialization, by spreading out the business, Britain wants to occupy the whole world. And the whole literature was influenced by it. Earlier, the whole literature was written on the basis of agriculture, but later on it turned into the industrialization. It is well known that in India, in 1600, British East India Company came in India for spreading out their business. By spreading out their business, they wanted to spread out their language. And in this present time, we are understanding how American language is occupying the whole world. This was the language which ruled over all the nations. A discrediting of old tradition and religious faith in favor of accepting a mechanical, natural process, a new sense of empowerment for women and the working classes. Empowerment for women and the working classes. Writing, because what happened at that time? Due to industrialization, it brought revolution in the minds of the women and poor people, those who are working in the different industries. And we read in the modern literature, it happened in Russia. Russian Revolution came in 1917. So after that, it brought a great leadership of the Lenin in the USA. Women accounting for a major share both as consumers and producers of fiction. Many novels were serialized in magazines and periodicals, and the readers often played an important role in deciding what the writer would write. Thematically, domestic or middle class settings, issues related to family such as marriage, morality in relationship were widely dealt with, but sex was taboo. Sex was taboo at this time because they were not allowed to use any sexual practices at that time. The fallen woman had to be punished, removed from society, so the moral fabric was not compromised. However, by the last years of the century, there also began to emerge a picture of the new woman and novels engaged with feminist movement for women. Still, sex and relationships that would challenge established moral codes were hardly discussed, and the cat choppings, the awakening would have been considered true, transgressive, and explicit to be accepted. We shall look at the intellectual setting of the awakening next. So, are you understanding? Students, you are listening carefully. Time and again, when you will read the whole literature, textual readings, then you will get more understanding about the words and concepts of the novels. Location, the writer, and the novel. So, in the same series, we are studying symbols in the awakening. Symbolism. Symbol is the stem word. Symbol means hint, we can say. Any other word that we can use for symbol? Title, topic of any writing, that is symbolized. So that is more near with symbolism. Everything that is used by the novelist for the awakening, that was symbolized by the time, place and action, events and incidents of the past. Here we are reading contextualizing the awakening. Biographical approach to the awakening. Early life and background. Cat O'Flaherty. The Creole background. The important thing that we are to read in this chapter, that is the history of New Orleans. So you are to read it, the history of New Orleans.
New Orleans, as you may be aware, in the state of Florida, is on the Gulf of Mexico, with the state of Mississippi to east, Texas on the west, and Texas to the north. New Orleans has a very interesting colonized by both the French and the Spanish at various points in time.
Now you are getting some symbols and hints about the history of New Orleans. New Orleans, as you may be aware, is in the state of Louisiana in the United States of America. It is on the Gulf of Mexico with the state of Mississippi to the east, Texas on the west, and Arkansas to the north. New Orleans has a very interesting history, as it was basically colonized by both the French and the Spanish at various points in time. In order to get a better understanding of the history of New Orleans and of the Creole culture, it would be pertinent to look at some critical dates in the history of modern day North America. For this, we would need to go back a little further in time. Dear students, whenever we talk about the awakening and reawakening of the worldly nations, we remember a greater personality, that is Swami Vivekananda in India. And he went in the USA in 1893. It was the time of 1893 when Swamiji went to the USA, and the people were impressed by him. They stirred when they heard the voice of Swami Vivekananda. He addressed by using two symbols of the Indian culture, my brothers and sisters of the America. He used these two words, and these were the very simple words, but these words were the symbol of being nationalistic and patriotic person of our nation. This was a symbol of our culture. The Americans were totally impressed by that personality. All religious bodies, doctors, ministers, researchers, those who were present at, they were totally impressed by that personality because of the originality of that personalities, who created upheaval in their mind and hearts of the people. As far back as the beginning of the 17th century, France had already explored the Mississippi River Valley and also established a few settlements in the area. By the middle age of 18th century, France had a major dominance over territories in the United States than any other European power. Her sway extended from New Orleans to the Great Lakes and towards the northwest to the state of modern-day Montana. The New Orleans of today was established by the explorer Robert Cavelier de la Salle in 1682 and was later christened La Nouvelle Orleans in 1718 by Jean-Baptiste de Moigny de Bionville. New Orleans was to grow and develop around the old square or the weak scale, which was basically a central square from which the French quarter evolved. In 1762, the France Louisiana west of the Mississippi River to Spain after the French and Indian War. Hence, from 1763 to 18, La Nouvelle Orleans was under Spanish rule. During these 4 decades, New Orleans was an important trading and cultural Spanish outpost with friendly ties to Cuba, Haiti, and Mexico. The Spanish period of New Orleans history saw more liberal views on race and fostered a social class of people known as the free people of color. We must also remember that America during these early years of the 19th century still had a large population of the people of color working in the plantations in the southern states. What happened in 1800? This was the subsequent time when Swami Vivekananda came and started his mission in the different nations for addressing the message of Indian culture. The Spanish ceded Louisiana back to France, but Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, was ready to sell the city and Louisiana territory to the United States. As a result of Napoleon's eagerness to cede Louisiana to the United States of America was also to acquire nearly 828,000 square miles of land at a very low cost. The treaty between France and the United States was drawn up on April 30 and signed on May 2nd. In October 1803, the USA France transferred authority over the region of the United States as a part of the $15 million Louisiana purchase. Although the French sold Louisiana to the United States, the inhabitants of New Orleans choose not to abandon their old ways, their culture and mores, if ways, speaking mostly French and following French customs, cooking French cuisine and propagating the opera and the complex social strata of the French residents of a now newly American city. The Creoles, who were American born offspring of European settlers, many with French blood, were to create a sophisticated and cosmopolitan society in colonial New Orleans. New Orleans, as you may already know, as also the birthplace of jazz, which emerged as during the late 19th century. This was the time of cosmopolitan outlook, international outlook. Who is a cosmopolitan person? Who is an internationalistic person? A person who loves his country without hating with another country. He is known as cosmopolitan and he is known as internationalistic. So likely that this term was created and coined at this time through the New Orleans. Through the history of New Orleans we understand it. But from what we have to read, what we have to read so far about New Orleans, the geography and culture of the city, what is crucial for our understanding is also who or what the Creoles were, as the Creoles are a large part of the culture in which Kat Chopin lived and wrote. Moreover, they figure prominently in the novel under study. So dear friends, sum up this topic, we can understand it through the history of Kat Chopin, who was also the inspirer, motivator and the inventor of the awakening in the America. Let us sum up this topic through these words. The story of Kat Chopin's life can be divided into two neat sections. She belonged to an upper middle class Irish and French family and was married to a young businessman with a promising prospectus. She became the mother of 6 children between the years 1871 to 1879. The second part of her life was devoted to writing, as one scholar writes about his clear division. Chopin writes in her diary on 22nd May 1894 about the changes that came into her life after the death of her husband in 1882 and her mother in 1885. If it were possible for my mother and husband to come back to earth, I feel I would unhesitatingly give up everything that has come into my life since they left. To do that, I would have to forget the past 10 years of my growth, my real growth. However, her early family life in Louisiana, both the cosmopolitan Creole life of New Orleans and the rural, largely Cajun Acadian culture she was part of, contributed a great deal to her later life as a writer. When she moved to the intellectual circles of the St. Louis after her husband's death, the life and society there encouraged her innate literary talents and abilities. So in short, you can write these words and sentences. Is it enough? Next is critical responses to the awakening. Would you like to read it? Read out please. Critical history of the awakening. You can write, you have to read summary of the 19th century and other early critical responses. Mid-century critical responses until the novel's rebirth in 1969. Then later you will read modern critical interpretations. Modern critical interpretations. I will try to sum up important post 1970 responses to the novel so you get a fair idea about how the critical insights change and develop. As new literary theories began to shape thinking, although critics interestingly began to see the awakening as a crucial literary statement about a woman's quest for emancipation from traditional and stereotypical gender roles, leading to her determination to live life on her own terms. There was an emphasis that it was not exactly a political work where the woman was a crusader for women's rights, that she was really a writer who held a moderate position and did not intend the work to be a feminist document. Some see her as trapped in a system to which she offers at best some personal rebellion and resistance. Lawrence Thornton perceives the text to be very political as Edna is deceived by her private vision and by the society she discovers during the summer on Grand Isle. Speaking also of the labyrinth of the social conventions, marriage, and motherhood that is closing around her like a vise. Linda Huff believes Edna lives as now woman in an old society with its conventions, prejudices, superstitions, too small though to be able to change anything. In 1976, Emily Toth saw Edna as embodying 19th century feminist criticism, though other feminist critics have been her as a not able to go beyond self-questioning to a larger engagement with the social structure of operations. Critics have recognized Edna's articulation of important issues like childhood and motherhood as proving to be disastrous, causing insanity, death, and of more significance to show up in a woman's loss of self. So this is the modern interpretations of the novels, interpreting the awakening. We are reading in it the name of Freud. Here we talk Stephen Heath, Chopin's paratextual practice. This essay is particularly relevant as it compares once more Gustave Flaubert's Emma Bovary and Cat Chopin, The Awakening. Heath traces Emma's journey towards becoming Edna. The married woman moves once more to suicide. After weariness in marriage and knowledge of an adulterous passion, he notices too, however, the sophistications of Chopin, the later writer, well read in the works of Charles Darwin, Aldous Huxley, Herbert Spencer, and thus familiar with the intellectual thought of time, analyzing the unconventional behavior of both heroines as pathological. He comments on the presence of a Dr. Mendelit who suggests she needs an inspired psychologist, thus anticipating the theories of Freud. Freudian theory. This was the Freudian theory. There are three kinds of mind a man has. One is conscious mind, through which we are talking and interconversing each other. Second one, which is just thinking but not speaking but not expressing, that is subconscious. And one intellectual thought running in our mind at night while closing our eyes, that is unconscious position. So Freudian theory is that theory which explains about three kinds of mind, and as per the medical science we study in the theory of psychiatrist. The psychiatrist tries to study deeply in medical science. So you can define it very easily, no problem. You can define this. Let us sum up with your words. You have to read it. Please read down it. Carry on, carry
Comments
Speak
and
loudly.
response that it generated, particularly at a time when the novel was published from and reborn in the 1970 and the that feminist